Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everybody. We all deal with this one situation or many different situations, and it could have happened when we were children, and we're still dealing with it today as we try to pilot our adult lives. And quite simply, I'm talking about the traumas that we've dealt with. And I divide them in two separate categories in my mind: little T trauma, big T trauma. But the little T's can hold us back just as much as the big T traumas. We're going to learn all about that today. And he helps people with this and so much more as an amazing psychotherapist. And he's back with us. Dr. Barry Pilson is on the program. Hi, Barry. How you doing?
Good, Steve. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy our interaction and our talks.
Same here. Learn a lot. And for many, I think this is going to be an eye opener, because if we were to say to somebody, hey, I know you've suffered a trauma, many people might say, oh, no, I never had an issue. We have this visual of trauma being like a car accident or something major, maybe the passing of a loved one. Certainly that's a trauma for sure. But there's other things that we may have experienced as kids that have piloted our lives, held us back subconsciously from doing a lot of the things that we want to do or enjoy. And it could be something, I don't want to say insignificant, but something much smaller. Both are impactful, right? Big and small.
Yes, yes. And one of the things I want to do today, a little bit like we were doing somewhat with the depression talk, is in this day and age, we use trauma a lot in our everyday kind of interaction with people. You know, we express, oh, I was traumatized today. You know, there was too much traffic. All right. It's kind of a global, it's become kind of a global term. What I would like to do, though, today is kind of separate it out, in terms of what you were just talking about. And one way to do that is it's actually written like this in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychiatric Disorders. But anyway, just to be helpful, there's acute trauma, which is kind of what you were talking about, where there's kind of a single event might have come on, like a traffic accident, or like a terrible weather event, like a hurricane, or other things, like a robbery, or burglary of your space.
Sure.
You walk into your house, your place of business, it's been rifled through. That is a trauma. That is a single event that is very distressing or disturbing. Okay. Or, a simple injury that you might have gotten, for a variety of reasons. So there's acute trauma, which is, again, can be defined somewhat within a certain parameter of time and space. There's kind of chronic trauma, and chronic trauma is a little bit of what you were also talking about, which is a series of events that might have occurred throughout your childhood or even throughout your life. A good example of chronic trauma might be domestic violence, for instance, where there's a lot of arguing, emotional and or physical, in a family, in a relationship. And as a result, on a chronic basis, on an ongoing basis, the person is experiencing trauma. Obviously, past trauma, not past, it's always past, but where there's been sexual abuse or physical abuse from your childhood as well. A lot of children, if they're being bullied on an ongoing way, that is a chronic trauma as well. Okay. And, they develop from that chronic trauma, as well as in domestic violence and past abuse, are certain patterns of behavior where you're trying to protect yourself, where you're trying to seek some kind of safety. And often in doing that, especially if you're responding to the trauma, your safety and your seeking of some kind of protection doesn't always solve the trauma. It may even make things worse sometimes, such as I'm being bullied and therefore I'm going to stay away from everybody. I'm going to hide, so to speak. And, that type of, or in a domestic violence situation, where I'm seeking to hide and protect myself or to omit information or to not tell people exactly what's going on. So there's a lot of different processes involved. So there's acute trauma, there's chronic trauma that's kind of ongoing, and there's also something called complex trauma, which is kind of an addition of acute and chronic. So anyway, I'm saying all that to say that it's not, there's okay, I was traumatized today, but then there's also different ways to understand that whole process.
Now, everything that you've described there, I would put them in the category of the big T trauma or close to the big T trauma, some of
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
Um, and certainly I can see how those can be impactful in somebody's life. Those things could have happened at a younger age, and that could give you a limiting belief, and then you don't move forward with your life in many regards. Then we have the little T traumas. And as I understand it, and I really would love your feedback on this, Barry, where it could be a comment that somebody just said when you were 6 years old, and
yes,
it got to you, resonated with you
right,
as a little
right,
kid. You,
right.
the world is so wonderful. Bam, you get this, like you do a painting at 6 and you paint the sky green. Okay, so what? You're being creative. And mom says, "Hey,
Yes, very
that's
good.
wonderful, wonderful painting, a little Jimmy. You did a great job." Now, we know the sky's blue, Jimmy. You know it's blue. Now, come on. You could do better than that. And bam, now you have a feeling of inadequacy. I'm not good enough. And that one comment, is it possible that one, parental comment where your mom didn't mean anything? She was just saying, maybe she didn't want you to get bullied in school, oh, Jimmy, you made the sky green, not blue. Could that
Yeah,
be something that holds you back later in life? That one comment.
yeah. I mean, the simple answer is yes. The more complex answer, though, is probably, if that comment was made one time, it might have been absorbed and forgotten, to be honest. Okay.
Hmm.
However, it probably indicates actually the dynamics of the relationship in the example that just gave
Mm,
between the mother
mm,
and child. That she
mm.
might, and I'm not blaming, but she might be critical. Oh, that's great, but you give that kind of yes, but that's great, but you got to make the sky blue, or it's not good enough, as you just said.
Or
And
the
then when you
next
move into
episode, Jimmy's now 7. He's playing a soccer on the
yes,
field, and he
yes,
kicked and he missed the ball. And mom's like, "Yeah, that was great, Jimmy. Yep, yep. You shouldn't have missed that one, though. That came right to
right,
you." I see what you're saying there. I never even thought
yeah,
about that being the kind of the baseline for that relationship. And again, nothing, no knock against the parent. They just, and you know what? They're probably emulating what they got when they were a child.
right. And from their viewpoint, they're just trying to quote improve my child.
Right.
Okay, I'm just trying to help my child move along. You
Yep.
know, they don't want to go into the world thinking that the sky is green. Okay, um, so it gets confusing in that sense. And as an adult, sometimes, as you just said, when you somebody might say something, well, that's nice, but it's not good enough. That's the essence of what they're telling you.
Right.
Then you can go back into the big T, into the ongoing trauma of, I don't know. It's hard for me to experience myself as being good enough. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or a little criticism. Somebody might say, well, I didn't really mean anything by that. That's the famous thing. And in a way, you can't really say, okay, you meant something by that or you didn't,
Right.
because it's how you absorbed it. Okay. And it's very difficult for people in interaction to understand sometimes how somebody, because you can say, I feel criticized, or I feel like you're putting me down. Well, no, I wasn't putting you down. I was just making a comment. And you can't
Right.
reconcile that really, okay, between the two of you.
Mm.
You can't say who's right, who's wrong. So you have those kinds of triggers in terms of trauma. In general, if you're kind of in a trauma state at different times, you're kind of hyper vigilant. You're kind of hyper aroused.
Mm,
You're always kind of looking around. Is the world safe? Is this person safe? How do I manage myself? Uh, if I go down this street, is that safe? If I uh, say this in this social situation, is that safe? Oh, how's that person responding to me? So it can be a very sort of hyper vigilant, hyper aroused state that's difficult to navigate through the world. And people will experience you as sort of being anxious and kind of, tense, and reactive, which doesn't, which leads to a certain sense of discomfort all the way around. So those are some of the
sure.
difficulties.
All right.
Uh,
So I have a personal question.
sure.
Uh, do you have kids, Barry?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Knowing what you know now about how the things can impact kids, just a little comment could make a difference. Would you have reparented, knowing everything you know now? Yeah, a
Well,
little differently.
well, that's a good question, because believe it or not, we tend to parent unconsciously as well. So, I'm sure that I, looking back, yes, I've been critical, or I could be critical, and would I catch myself necessarily and say, uh, "Gee, I shouldn't have said that"? No, but here's
Hmm.
the deal: in our adulthood, if my because my children are adults, if they tell me, look, that I really did experience that as critical, I would hope, and I have, say, okay, I hear you. I really didn't view it that way, but that's not the point. The point is, let's talk about that,
Yeah.
and this is what was going on. So you can very easily, not easily, but very uh, precisely, not just undo something, but reprogram some of the dynamics that happened, which is actually what psychotherapy is about. Also, it's
Sure.
kind of a reparenting anyway, but it's and it's not just the therapist reparenting the patient, but the patient really reparenting themselves in the long run.
You give us as the practitioner the tools to do that,
Yes.
or open up our minds. And the question I had for you, I've asked that of myself, and certainly the critical stuff, no brainer there. Okay, probably
Yeah.
not. Probably would have done it differently, knowing how it makes such an impact on a child, but also even the goofy stuff. Like, I think of the
Yes.
silly things I've done. I used to give my kids funny little names, just, goofing around, just, every other day was, a different name. My father used to do that to me. Not negative names, just a, fun name. Now that I look at it in a different light, depending on the child, that could be impactful where they might take that a certain way. So I'm saying, as a parent, maybe more of a filter in thinking about how it could be
Yes.
perceived. Even though you're just
Yes.
being fun, a fun dad, a fun mom,
That's right.
it can make a difference in some way,
Yeah.
shape, and form.
Yeah. And actually, as a kind of remedy to that, if you have children and you're dealing with that, and that's a good example. You're playing around, giving names, giving nicknames. You might ask later on to the child, how did you feel when we were calling you this, or when I was calling you that? Just and just with the instruction, just be honest.
Hmm.
Uh, and you can get a discussion going with that. That again helps repair, if you want to call it that,
Sure.
that process. You know,
And when I say,
which is important.
names, well, I'm talking about terms of endearment, not like, hey, big nose, nothing like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But one example, those things can make a difference. But again, it depends on the child. You could have two children. They could be treated
right.
the exact same way. One internalizes something totally different than the other one.
That's absolutely true. That is absolutely true. And the only way sometimes you know that is just by simply dialoguing, with the person. Just as with an adult, you might be in a close relationship with somebody, and you say you're teasing a little bit or joking a little bit, and all of a sudden they respond like, "Oh my God," you know,
Hmm.
and well, I didn't do that. I didn't mean to do that. Well, just forget that I didn't mean to do that. let's just talk about, you know, the harm or the hurt or the anger or the feeling that you feel. Okay. And I don't have to be defensive. I just want to hear that because I want to know you better, you know. And
Absolutely.
that's kind of, and that's, by the way, that's the whole kind of longer term process for recovery from trauma. Okay, that you don't get. You see, what happens a lot of times is what you kind of said is we get stuck in the feeling, we get stuck in the belief system that accompanied the feeling. Okay,
Hmm.
so I feel, maybe you said something that could be interpreted as shaming, well, you're not very good at doing that, are you? Have you been practicing or have you, now I'm feeling ashamed. I have a shame response, but I also think, you see, I don't ever do anything right, you know, and that becomes the belief system. All right.
Ah.
Uh, and that's where, again, it's a belief system combined with the feeling, combined with the experience that the trauma sort of takes hold and and can be a almost a guidepost to how you process information, and
Hmm.
that's where that you can be open to change with that. Okay, uh, where you can, again, like I described earlier, you can kind of reparent yourself, and that you're not as bonded to the trauma when you hear a triggering event or a triggering phrase, like we just said.
So let's go into the different types of trauma and how you walk somebody through that with psychotherapy.
So, I mentioned before that one of the keys to dealing with trauma is a sense of safety and a sense of support. Okay. So, what you want to do is talk to the person about how to create safety in their life. If they're with an abusive person, for instance, okay, who says abusive things, you know, and you might be very bonded to them, okay, for a variety of reasons. It's not good or bad, but at times they say abusive stuff, okay. Then the question for you emotionally is, how do you create safety with that situation? All right. Do you need, for instance, in a simple way, do you need to take a time out, you know, uh, to get safe? Um, what kind of support do you might need from activities or other people that help you feel like, again, that you're safe? All right. So uh, all right. So that's the kind of ongoing process of dealing with trauma in the moment, as well as trying to create support and safety in your life. All right. And you got to be smart about that. That's not easy to do. You might, for instance, you might think, and we'll get into this later on too, that uh, I'm going to I really had a rough day. I was traumatized. Here we go again. I was traumatized by this or that. I need to have a drink. I need to have alcohol. Okay.
Mm.
Well, is that a safe thing to do, or is that an escape thing to do? And if you're just escaping, are you creating safety in your life? All right. And that's the key component.
Now, how
And
could
for
I want to look at that.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
How does, you're in a situation, I'm gonna have a drink. How does that create safety? Well, obviously the escapism, we got that. How would
Yeah.
that create a safety situation for you?
Well, that's the point. Escape may be mixed up with safety. Okay. If I get away, I'll feel safe.
Okay.
Okay. So the escapism may be the quick answers, fly, it's kind of like, I'm going to fly away so I
Yeah.
don't have to feel that. All right.
It's a
But it may not
false
produce.
sense of security.
Right, right, right,
Okay.
right. And
Wow.
that's the point. Okay. Um, so, one of the ongoing things, again, is identifying how one is experiencing trauma in the present. Okay. You know, am I continually kind of experiencing this sense of I'm not good enough, or this sense of, I've done something bad and I should be punished. All right. And so what you want to do is identify how one is experiencing that in the present, and how do you change that in the present with either your setting that you're in the environment that you're in. Maybe you're hanging around a group of people that like to tease all the time, okay? And it's the one big fraternity party or sorority, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and it's ha ha ha, we're just having fun and we're joking at everybody's expense. Well, that may not be a safe place to be, okay?
Yeah.
And like kids, you tease until somebody falls apart or until somebody gets angry. All right. So, you don't want to create that kind of trauma in your life again and again. And so, as an adult, be careful who you're friends with, to be honest. Okay.
That's a really great point. You might not notice because you got sucked down the rabbit hole of that group of friends where
That's right.
they might not really be supporting you or each other. It might be a free for all of making fun of each other, there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes it's kind of funny,
Right.
but at the same time, you might not realize that in your situation, again, everybody's different. That may, without your awareness, be just pounding on you in terms of your self-esteem and all of that.
Yeah. And at a certain time in your life, maybe that process in that group was fun and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But then at another time in our life, it no longer applies. Okay.
Exactly.
Teasing each other at a certain age or at a certain time in life isn't the same as when you're 19 or 20. Okay.
Right. Yep. Totally. We're almost out of time. What other points do we want to look at here when it comes to trauma?
Well, what I'm saying is the biggest point is how do we often end up experiencing some of those same negative kinds of feelings in our present, and what can we do in the present to create more safety and support? Okay. Now, what I want to get into a little bit next week is that fits a lot of times into a addiction, and that's a big issue in our culture as well. And I want to look at how addiction often seems to be a quick answer to the trauma experience. And a lot of people even say that trauma is the bedrock of addiction. Now, that's true and that's not true. Okay. But I want to clarify that as well.
Well, fantastic. And you illustrated that today in talking about that person that just grabs a drink. Well, nothing really wrong with that, in my opinion. However, if it's escapism, that's one thing. And if that's a false sense of security, that's another thing, which can lead to addiction, which we'll talk about next time we get together. Your website, very easy. It's your name. It's Barry Pilson, PhD.com. Is that right?
.com. That's correct, Steve.
Yep. And
Thank you for the.
Yeah, you're available virtually anywhere as a therapist with so much credential to help somebody deal with all of these situations. Plus, you're a nice guy and easy to talk to. For me, that's the most important part.
Well, I hope that's what this is showing. To a certain extent.
It does.
That talking does make a difference, by the way.
It really does. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll talk next time.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.